Why don't we'll put it on the next regs committee agenda. Okay, so that's that. I think then the last one is contractors storage yards. And I have put in the share file the markup.
The red line version?
The red line version, correct.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you'd like to proceed in discussion. If you want to go sort of the line by line.
My preference would be to go line by line and say this works or this doesn't, and then maybe talk about what would.
Want to put it up on the screen? Go through it.
Sure. Hold on.
All right.
Okay, so here's storage yards.
For whatever reason, now I do see your desktop, John. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, so this is the red line, and hopefully people can see that. So the first is 1052.2. It shall be a 50-foot change buffer to setback from all residential districts, and then crossed out, and abutting residential properties and structure. So,
you know, we use that language in other sections. Districts and structures for other uses.
So, you know, for me, I think that we ought to have a hybrid of what's there. I prefer the term setback over buffer, but I would leave in the residential properties so that, you know, it does provide a resident in a non-residential zone a little bit of protection. And I think that was the biggest complaint that the public had.
That's right.
Absolutely.
and so just to again sort of run this forward, so that makes, I think that makes sense. So if you're next to a residence in a, you know, industrial zone, like on a Meadow Road or something like that, and so you have a setback there. If that residence leaves, you know, and that gets converted, then you would in theory be able to move your contractor storage stuff closer to the property line.
Mm-hmm.
But what if that, well, I suppose it's unlikely to get converted from a non-residential to a residential
Right.
use
I mean,
in a non-residential zone.
In that case, whoever's converting it to a residence knows what they're getting into ahead of time.
Right.
So
This is
then they
primarily,
can choose to live with it or not buy.
yeah, this is primarily for those areas with, you know, the residences that existed before the zoning ordinance went in.
Well,
Yeah. So what we're looking at is wording that said there shall be a 50-foot setback from all residential districts and abutting residential properties and structures, what you're making it as.
Yes.
Okay, you know, so basically in this particular section, the only thing we would be changing is buffer to setback, and I guess we may as well say structures. But we-
Structures instead of structure.
Yeah, but leave.
yeah, what is the word structure bias in this sentence?
I suppose. Well, the question is, you know, is there some portion of the like if you know you want to separate it from the house versus, say, if there's an accessory, like there's a shed closer to the edge of the residential property.
Right, but it's not going to get closer than the edge of the property.
So the resident,
Not
yeah.
like-
So the structure doesn't really buy
Buy
anything.
anything.
Yeah.
So delete and structures and do it from the lot line. So 50 feet from the residential lot
All
line.
residential districts and abutting residential properties. I guess that would work, yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So then the next
Alright.
change is outside storage. So sub C2 says outside storage area shall be screened from public view rather than enclosed by either a 6-foot high fence, which is down from 14 feet, that is opaque or solid, and then the proposed addition, or a natural barrier composed of native species, and then or a combination thereof. So basically removing 14-foot fence and allowing some flexibility of alternative screening.
I think I'd prefer an 8-foot to a 6-foot fence requirement, but
Yeah, I would too, for security if nothing else.
But then that gets the trick then there is, could you, an 8-foot fence triggers.
So now you got a permit for the fence.
And you have to respect setbacks. So the fence would have to be, you know.
All right, so maybe we could go with the 7-foot fence to be consistent with what we were already talking about earlier.
I was in favor.
Problem is, a 7-foot fence is an odd size. 6 is very common, 8 is very common.
Yep.
Yeah.
14 is very uncommon.
14 is very unwieldy.
No, I could go with a 6-foot high fence for security purposes, but I would do and rather than either. I mean, I would also have perimeter landscaping. I mean, they could have the fence for security reasons. Nobody walks off with their equipment, but I would.
Perimeter landscaping is a lot different than a buffer, than a vegetative buffer, right? Perimeter landscaping could be some flowers. A buffer is a fairly dense section of vegetation.
Well, then maybe we should go back to the one we just changed from buffer to setback and reinstall buffer. Make it a buffer.
Well,
These
one
are
issue is that you're requiring the natural barrier of a native species is not necessarily going to work everywhere. If you've got a rock ledge,
right.
you know, there are
Right.
ways to put in a fence, but it's going to be pretty difficult to grow trees.
I mean, it was just fence, and then we changed it previously before it got overturned to allow the option to have a vegetative buffer, which I think most people would probably prefer to see, but I kind of think you need to leave the option there for different scenarios.
Depending upon the terrain, it just might not be feasible.
Okay.
The,
I'll go with flow. What you said, but I really think looking at the scale of what is being stored in these yards, the type of equipment, I mean, the higher the vegetation, the better. You don't have to deal with requirements, permit requirements for plantings yet in this town. But you know, I would like to see.
So the vegetation would have to be at least as high as the fence calls for, and then
Right.
ideally vegetation continues to grow.
Right. And instead of native species, I would put down coniferous species. I mean,
Okay.
let's get evergreens. So
I think again that there's scenarios where that don't work, and you know there are many evergreens that won't take in certain soil types or certain wind type climates. Not sure we can
the closer you get
necessarily
to,
limit it to that.
okay.
the closer you get to salt water, the more problem you have with evergreens.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
agree.
Or even
Who's gonna
or
do?
even the closer you get to the street that gets the salt sprayed with the snow.
right, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Then you end up with a bunch of arborvitaes that's all brown or dead 5 feet down.
The I don't think we have that many. You know, we do salt water here. Granted, the industrial areas are not the closest to the sound, but
A natural barrier composed of usually impermeable native species, or I mean, I'm just.
I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying, Martin. I'm just realizing, that, evergreens have an issue if you're close to the
Okay.
site.
Okay, I'll go with that's fine. I'm not rigid. The buffer.
So would you have to, would it make sense to add language that if they choose to use a natural buffer, you'd have to approve a landscape plan? Or is that required anyway? Is this a special exception?
It's a special exception, so we could,
You'd have to have the
should
plan
be subject
anyway.
to review.
Right.
Yeah, so that's where you get the, accept or not accept the buffer.
And as the wetlands enforcement officer, I'd like to see native if possible, if it's near a wetland. We don't want invasives.
Yep.
No.
So,
To make it
What do you
easier.
mean? You don't want your screen wall of bamboo?
yeah. Because bamboo is thick and it does provide screening.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd like to keep native in there, if that's okay.
Right.
World's largest weed. The problem with live landscaping, I mean, as desirable as it is, the fact is that if you don't water it, it's going to die.
And if you water it with salt water, it does.
I know. Do you want annual certification that the landscaping is being properly maintained? Put the onus on the landowner to inform Kathy that it's still around. This is one of the things that after you approve it, everybody forgets about it.
Yeah.
Right, 5 years down the line, it's got a bunch of dead plants. And nobody's following up on it. So the landscaping plan and maybe certification that the landscaping plan is being met, annual certification by the landowner.
Well, a landscaping plan along with a landscaping maintenance plan or something.
Right, or landscaping, planting and maintenance. A landscaping, planting and maintenance plan. So, because, what's going to happen.
We frequently ask for maintenance plan.
Right. Okay. That's fine.
Okay.
We can come up with the wording. And again, under subsection 2, subsection 1, C2, little I, it isn't so much the width, it's really the visual impermeability of the buffer. So I don't know how to phrase it. I mean, I've seen performance zoning that has an opacity limit of 80% or something of that nature. I don't know how much you want to get into.
We could say, just say the landscape plan that and suitable for screening. That the landscape plan should be suitable for screening. So you would need to demonstrate.
Okay.
So we can put some language in there. I'm suggesting that this section that I'm adding would be our notes to sort of guide this whole subsection.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay.
What about height limits?
Height limits for
storage.
Oh, it's
On-site
stuff, I
storage.
mean, like cranes and things.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So hold on, let me just see if there's something in here. Okay, yeah. Good point. What would you suggest, Alan?
Well, that anything over the height that's allowed in the structure, I'd allow stockpiling up to the height of the primary structure.
That's a good provision. Good.
Well, why wouldn't we just limit it to whatever our structure height limits are? If the guy has a single-story building, then he can't bring a 10-foot.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So if we limit it to the height of the maximum structure height in a rec, that's just.
Which is what?
Probably about 35 feet.
I think it's about 30 or 35 feet in most places.
That's a little high.
Yeah.
Right, but
That's
so
hard
that
to screen.
Yeah. But then, I mean, there are then, you know, again, I'm always in the market for workarounds. Someone could, if you've got an 18-foot building, and you want to store a 30-foot crane or whatever, you just, throw a tall cupola on top of your existing building, and there's your height.
So I don't think we need to tie it to the building that's on
That's
there.
not-
And we got to remember, you're shoving this into an industrial zone. You're only giving them a small place to have storage yards. You got to let them be able to store their stuff within reason.
Yeah, I agree, but, the problem is primarily the crane problem.
I mean, we store cranes in industrial areas. I don't have a big problem with that. I mean,
Yeah, the problem is storing the cranes in the industrial area, that was put in place after the residential structures were already
But
there.
if they can't store their equipment in an industrial area, where can they?
I think that we all realize that the problem is the few yards in town that have kind of gotten isolated and surrounded by more residential areas. That's the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, do you want to just have a provision restricting cranes in proximity to districts? I mean,
No, I don't want to do that.
Then you got to define what a crane is, and there could
Oh,
be
yeah,
other
the-
equipment that was equally tall. It gets to be a real issue.
maximum height of the district, or you want it the fencing height where it abuts a residential district? I mean,
You couldn't put a truck in there if you restrict it to the 6 or 8 feet.
right. I mean, a truck is
14 feet.
Yeah. I mean, do we want to put this out there and see what the commission has to say about it when we discuss it?
That's fine. They're gonna have to vote on it.
If we can reach agreement on or consensus on some of the other stuff and have just 3 or 4 remaining questions, that might work.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to propose something for the commission to discuss. We can't just leave it open-ended, because then you don't have something you can put in front of the public hearing.
Right. So I think, the way I've written it, the way I've sketched it out would be that stockpiling or stored equipment shall be below, or shall be, below the maximum structural height allowed in the district.
I think you forgot the allowed, but
Yeah.
So
So
let me ask you as an aside question. When I go down to the marina and the boats are the sailboats are sitting in their cradles for the winter, and they have their mast in them, and the mast is 60 feet tall. What do we do there?
well, I guess that's not considered a contractor storage yard is the issue.
It's not, but why would it be any different? What if I have the house next to the marina and I don't want to look at all those maps? How is that any different?
Well, I guess
And I'm a sailor. That's why I like sailboats.
Yeah.
I'm putting an example out there.
Yeah. No,
right,
that's
I
a
think
word. That's a word.
that we write different regs for different uses in different areas, and that we've decided that masts are different from cranes. And I think that's
Why do we get to decide that though?
Because you're the
because we
zoning
get to
officer.
write the regs.
the plan and zoning.
What makes them different?
Just,
I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah,
I
because
realize that.
A crane will sink if you drop it in the water.
Which
How tall is a typical crane? Is it more than the height of the structure?
Well, if it's
Can be
extended, it
very
can
high.
be, sure. Some cranes,
There's not a typical crane. There's so many different sizes and shapes, and half the time guys lay the booms down anyway so they don't get hit by lightning.
Well, that's another thing, that they should lower them to the extent possible.
So is it reasonable to ask them to have their storage below the maximum height if they're going to have things like a crane?
well, the crane has got to, collapse down to a height where it can travel on the road, so, but,
Which is the limit of a tractor trailer, basically.
but,
the height limit.
the reason they like to store them with the crane up is that it takes a lot less room, and they can, therefore put
Right.
tweak and where they can. Yeah.
Or they use it on the property to lift things up and put things down.
Yeah.
So the boom stays assembled.
Yeah.
Well, it can stay assembled, but usually can be retracted or lowered.
Yeah,
It still has to travel on the road.
Yeah.
Because we had that petition from, you remember the marina, from Chris Shapiro to raise the height in the marine district to accommodate lifts in the boat yard, because he said he couldn't get the boats into storage with the height requirement that existed. Since Adam brought up the boat storage, I was just wondering, how that works in terms of the height, and if a business can operate with that, or if they would need a higher height restriction.
Maybe there's language that if we in general limit the height of material and equipment to whatever the maximum height in the zone is for a structure, unless otherwise approved by the special exception. So if somebody has, a legitimate reason or enough property or enough screening where it doesn't matter and can demonstrate that, then there's a way to allow it.
That might be an approach, because it would also allow us to handle things differently for a yard that's really completely in an industrial area, and those few remaining grandfathered properties that are very, very close to residential areas. Which, as I say, remain the biggest problem with this.
Adam, could you restate what you just proposed?
Well, the proposal was that the general statement would be that the equipment or stockpile storage would need to be no higher than the maximum allowable building height for that zone, unless otherwise approved in the special exception, and then the property owner would have to demonstrate why they would need something taller than that, or that they have enough property that nobody can see it, it doesn't matter, or it's sufficiently screened by whatever means.
Could go along with that.
I have just a weird question. When you talk about screening from public view, does that include the rail line?
I didn't hear you, Mark.
I said, when we're talking about screening these from public view, does the public view encompass the rail line?
No, it's not considered a public way.
Yeah. Considering the stuff you see along the railroad cut.
If you take the train up to the old Saybrook station, there's a lot of junky lots.
There sure is.
Tracks.
North of the track.
Clinton.
Yeah.
Do we want it? Do we want those storage areas to be screened? I mean, it's where most people perceive our community. It's on the train.
I take the train all the time from New Haven all the way down to Princeton, New Jersey.
Okay.
Nobody screens their stuff from the train.
Yeah, when you get into Westchester County, you see some really great stuff.
I mean, I had anecdotally, I had run into a similar issue on a design review commission in Chicago. We were talking about the L. Trying to screen things from L riders. So I'm just raising it. I mean, if that's the impression of our community, there's a lot of visitors. It doesn't look very welcome with people passing through. Just mentioning it.
I agree with you, Mark, that it doesn't look very good, and that it would certainly be better to get it cleaned up. I'm not sure that the zoning regs are the way to do it.
Well, the zoning would provide buffering. I mean, if you wanted it buffered, is all I'm raising. I mean, if you don't want to deal with it, that's fine too.
Yeah, you said that I just moral approach of my work better.
If that's the intent, then that's far broader than contractor storage yards. Look at all the backside, the supermarkets and any other thing,
A lot of
or
people
even
Well,
residences that just have poor, maintenance.
Yeah, you're right, Adam.
We'd have to go a lot deeper than this one's use.
yeah, right. Outside storage in general raises all kinds of issues, and we've not done anything really to protect ourselves from it. Abuses.
Yeah, the idea of just throwing stuff down the train track bank is goes back generations.
And I didn't want to derail our discussion as we're moving forward. But, could we talk about public views of the view from public areas? Or what is a public area at some future?
Right. And I would like to address the general issue of outside use, outside storage.
Okay.
Because, think about the flexibility that a business requires. And from week to week it can change. The equipment will be on the site, off-site. Materials will be on-site, off-site. Machinery coming in to be used in manufacturing is inside, outside, moved around according to workloads and all kinds of other things. But we don't really adequately look at outside storage of materials, equipment, waste, and all of that.
On a future,
in a range of commercial areas.
we do it on a future thing. I mean, Alan, you're on the design review commission or design review board. I mean, maybe just skate.
They have trouble with signs. Come on.
Well, okay.
Yeah, we can.
But
Yeah,
I think it's a growing issue because of the flexibility that industry has to show. I mean, it has to be able to turn itself around pretty rapidly, and I think we need to look at that.
It has to be objective, quantified, so I have a list of things, that's the problem.
No, exactly. A list
Yeah.
of uses, and it's storage of materials, equipment, waste, product, anything. Could be anything. It's the whole question of outside storage.
Well, we'll put it
We
on.
deal with the structures, but we don't deal that detail in any detail with the externalities.
No, we could deal with it at a future meeting.
I'm not suggesting we deal with it now.
No, I just it just is something I popped up. I don't want to derail everything.
Okay.
So now we're on
we'll-
setbacks.
yeah. So now we're on setbacks. This sort of the original says outside storage shall have 50-foot setback from all property lines. The proposal basically changed it from per district that the B4 would have a 25 front yard, 15-foot side, and the industrial districts would go to 5-yard setbacks, 10. And then 50-foot setback from residential districts, which echoes the standard above. So the question is, are we allowing?
I'm in favor of reducing the setbacks between
Industrial to business or
industrial
business to
uses.
business.
Right? I mean, that
How do
if
others
you
feel?
have, for example, two contractor storage yards side by side, those guys are going to want to maximize their use. And if you can give them a little more square footage, they may not need to go high with certain things. If you look at a 2-acre storage yard, if you put a 50-foot buffer all the way around that, you're going to make the effective area something like a half an acre.
Right.
I'm
we create
concerned
these
with the fact that the prior reg had reduced that down to 5 feet. And my concern is that for things that might be stored, in a pile of materials or whatever, crushed rock and the like, it's not a conical pile, it's more like a mountain range. And you could be creating a confined space between those piles and the fence that we're requiring. That's
But why,
a confined
why don't
space.
we let OSHA deal with that? It's not,
Well,
it's not a confined space.
Well, it's a space that's difficult to reach if someone should fall down the far side of the pile. That's the concern. I'd like to see a larger setback, at least in the 10-foot range, so that there's room to maneuver to get in there to deal with an accident or something. I just think 5
But
feet.
you couldn't get there anyway because you've either got a fence or a buffer.
Well, there'd be a fence, and then there would be at least the 10 feet or so where you could at least, carry a stretcher in or get in to deal with a person who is injured. Otherwise, a 5-foot space, I just think it's too dangerous.
Yeah, it should be
I
a
don't
lane.
think that's our purview. I
I
think
mean,
that's up to OSHA.
5 feet is the width of a sidewalk. I mean, you could.
Make it a vehicle.
I would agree with Ellen. I don't think 5 feet is adequate. Far from it.
Adam, what do you have to say about 10 feet?
Setback or to a fence? Where's the fence? On the property line?
Fence can be on a property line. So it's fence 10 feet.
So if we put 10 feet and you've got a 5-foot buffer instead of a fence, I don't know. I'm not sure 5 feet's worth arguing about. If we're talking about safety issues, who's a safety specialist on this committee?
Right.
Right? I mean, I deal with this stuff all the time because I've had OSHA training for various things, but I'm not claiming to be an expert in it.
Well, I don't think that we want to do something that is prima facie unsafe, and this just looks very, very unsafe to me.
Again, that's your opinion.
Well, I've had
I don't know
considerable experience in this area as well, but 5 feet is 5 feet does not work for me.
I'll put 10 feet in as a placeholder, because that's something that'll be
I'm
something
fine with
to
that.
respond to. Okay.
The B4 district, do we want 50-foot setback for residential and business districts? I mean, just have the smaller setbacks only within the industrial zone, but if we're to butts either business or residence, do you want a wider setback?
I mean, I'm fine with what's listed in B4 on the red line.
The 25 and 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they raise it.
Okay. So now we have the change of the regulatory reference to hazardous materials. That's obviously fine. So now we have emergency or transport equipment in or out of the site shall be conducted it changes from 7 a.m. to 6 a.m. earlier, and then Monday through Saturday, except during emergency circumstances, was the thing proposed.
Yeah. Who's defining this emergency?
Town
Okay.
council.
Thank you.
The zoning officer.
I think you need to go with a common sense definition.
Well, I mean,
Because this would be basically this would be in response to a complaint. Someone would be complaining that someone's moving equipment in and out of the site after 8 or before 6. the complaint would go to the zoning officer. The zoning officer would follow up with the property owner. What happened that you're moving equipment in, and they would have to justify their emergency.
Yeah, an emergency, I'm sure that some people would consider a financial emergency, a financial circumstance to be an emergency. I think that what we have here is more, dealing with, an actual natural disaster or something of that sort.
We have a circumstance like that Mike D'Amato and I were dealing with, and it was very difficult. There was somebody on Meadow Road, which is, as you know, very industrial, and the neighbor right next door kept complaining about it, but the owner said, listen, we have our trucks that travel and they don't get back until after 8 a.m. So they're pulling in because they have to go to New Jersey or wherever they're going. That's part of our business.
So that's not an emergency, that's their business plan.
Right, and so I don't know, I think it's really hard to enforce. I mean, Mike and I talked about it, and we said, well, we can't set up cameras, we're not coming here at midnight, and the person kept saying, well, they're operating at, these hours, and we contacted the owner of the business, and we talked with him as well, and he said, it's part of what we do, and we deliver, we leave early, we go, we come back, and so that's a tricky place, for us to be. Mike and I had a hard time with that one.
Should we just delete the except during emergency circumstances?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, so what happens when it starts snowing at midnight and people need to get plows out?
You better complain to Kathy.
I don't need more complaints. I just think it's depending on the type of business.
It's got to be reasonable.
Yeah, I think so, and I think too I think it was Adam said this earlier. If you're going to move into that kind of zone, sort of like buyer beware. You're living in an industrial zone, so don't buy a house next to it. And it's like don't live next to the school if you don't want to hear children.
Think about all the companies that have to pave in the middle of the night so that they don't affect traffic. Right? They don't even leave their yards until 10, 11 o'clock at night, and have to be back in, before 6.
For rush hour.
I mean, there's a lot of variables to this that don't fit neatly in a box.
Exactly. Yeah.
And maybe to be silent on it and deal with it as it comes up is the easiest way to do it.
I think that may be the best approach, and this is
because then it's an emergency. It doesn't. It's nothing planned.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody's already operating a business, I can't say, well, now you have to stop like this. I mean, I think if they've been doing it.
Well, this only applies to new
businesses.
Somebody's going to create something. If somebody already has an existing business, these new regulations won't apply.
But, I mean, I know we're trying to be business friendly. We certainly have a lot of large spaces. If somebody wants to move in, like you said, with a snow plow or something, we want to discourage them because we have this 8 o'clock cutoff time.
You kind of have to put something in there. I mean, the only way you could change it is to have language that says or as otherwise approved with a special exception. And if a guy that wants to open up a contractor storage yard and does all DOT paving and works at night and demonstrates a need, then the commission could address that through a special exception process.
Well, you could do it
Maybe we
that
should
way,
put that in there.
or you could do it except with the approval of the zoning. And we forget emergency circumstances, just have the zoning official allow them to arrange.
Well, I don't think it would go necessarily to the zoning official, because anybody that's doing this would have to come through for a special exception, I think, and they would have to state their business hours in their application to us. So I think we would be the body.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That should be at the time of special. That should be the
Fine.
time of special permit.
Yeah, because what if the emergency happens on the weekend? There's nobody here.
Yeah, no, I'm with Adam. That should be stated at the time of special permit.
And then if they have that circumstance, then the commission can decide whether or not they feel that's something they want to approve.
Just, yeah.
Right.
Good.
Or if they decide to get into paving, they have to come back and resubmit a permit for a change of use, I guess, or maybe not use, but
Activity, it's an activity.
yeah, yep.
Okay, so I can go with, I can support that. In terms of procedures, this is our next thing. Question, does the fire marshal deal with hazardous materials in Clinton? Who's responsible for hazardous material management?
It's really regulation mostly by OSHA, DEEP, and EPA.
The state, yeah. If we have a hazardous spill, they tell us about it, but it's handled through DEEP.
Yeah.
We don't need to deal with any of this stuff.
No, they just inform us.
I don't think our regulations even deal with that.
So it would just be, well, so what's remaining based on this edit would be the list of hazardous materials.
Why do we need to know that?
Or perhaps we don't. And so then it would just, then what would remain would just be name and contact of on-site responsible party.
Usually the state asks for location and extent. And the nature of the product, the location on site, and the extent of the material, hazardous material.
I mean, you don't want them filing material data safety sheets or anything with us. I mean, I don't want to look at that stuff.
Yeah, we're not qualified. I think that's something that goes through DEEP. Or OSHA.
But do we want, we ought to probably be notified if there's been a spill or release of material.
They just, like I said, they usually notify us.
The laws dictate who gets notified for release, and I don't think the planning and zoning needs to get involved with that.
Yeah, we just get notification because I don't have those kind of credentials to, work with that.
Okay.
Well, what about a provision that some sort of, that whatever the state law is compliance, whatever the state standards or law is, that there's full compliance.
But why do we even have to put that in our regs? They just have to be in compliance with state laws. Our regs don't need to know that.
We know how proactive the state is.
Isn't that what they're licensing?
All that ends up doing is creating potential contradictions.
Yeah, the only issue with material storage on site is that often state environmental agencies control, something that's, hazardous, flammable or carcinogenic or neurotoxic or whatever. But noxious odors they don't necessarily get involved with because in and of themselves they're not considered hazardous. So if we wanted to consider the possibility of materials that produce odors, it's sort of a different thing.
So we should just
Yeah, but we have that elsewhere in the regulations.
Yeah, you can't generate noise, odor, vibration.
Noise and
Don't put it here because then you create contradictions that you want to eliminate as many contradictions or redundancies as possible.
It's in the industrial zone anyhow, and those are performance standards for industrial uses, right? Right, John?
That's right.
So it'll be just covered under industrial performance standards.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine.
Then we can strip that back. And then the last thing here is required site plan shall. This shows original was include a layout of the storage area showing all separation distance, and they proposed designate an area to be used as outside storage.
Absolutely.
So that's just on the site plan. I mean, that would be, anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Can we change the wording under C to say a lighting plan shall be submitted with the application, including the security lighting? So the way it's worded, it looks like it might be just the security lighting that's
You want to use cutoffs adjacent to residential properties?
Okay.
Again, that all falls under other previously defined regulations.
Yeah, I mean, a lighting plan, I mean, and this is a special permit. If the lighting plan shows a tremendous spillover into residential areas, then they need to adjust their lighting plan. That would be part of the special permit process, I would assume.
So we'll put down a lighting plan shall be submitted with the application, including the security.
Right. Yeah, I would just change showing to including, because we want it to be all of the lighting, including
any security,
including things that are not necessarily security.
Security.
Yeah.
So
why don't you just say lighting? Why even bother defining
exactly.
security?
So just a full photometric lighting plan.
Yep. Okay.
And part of that is light levels off-site.
Right.
That's what the plan is. Yeah.
A photometric plan, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Also, there's more. Sorry, I thought that was it. There's more. Outside storage areas. This section does not. Outside storage areas.
This is a different section of the regs. I think if you go up to the top, you'll see that.
No, it's still Oh.
Yeah, this is. I don't know what the section is, but it's another whole section.
Okay. All right. It's okay. Well,
so setbacks. It says outside store, and this section does not apply. Yeah, I don't like that line. I think that it does, that the outside storage areas, that contractors' businesses should, for example, comply.
I mean, the structure.
No, but we've already created all those parameters in the contractor storage yard regulations. If you're tying them to other outside storage, which may be more applicable to behind a grocery store or behind a hardware store, then you're creating more contradictions again.
Well, we hadn't specifically, it says that it should not extend into the areas required for setbacks from a property line or residential district boundary line. That probably, perhaps the wording should be changed to, for a contractor businesses or storage yards, the setbacks specified in that section shall apply, rather than rather than saying that the whole outside storage regs don't apply.
I would just delete everything in red. I mean, you don't need a contractor business for contractor storage area, and they should comply with the setbacks.
Yeah.
If we
No. Outside storage is different than a contractor's storage yard.
Yes.
You can't apply the same regulation to a contractor storage yard as the 500 square feet of outside storage behind Stewart's Hardware, where he's got, his mulch bags and his sand. Those are two different things and should be intermixed, because you just create contradictions between the two.
Right. I agree.
So do we want? I'm sorry. So then, does that mean we keep this proposed change?
I'm not sure if that's the best way to word it.
I think it would be better to word it saying that for contractor storage businesses, and storage yards, the setbacks specified in section whatever it is shall apply.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that clarifies it.
Okay. Good. I go for dinner now? Can I have my dinner?
Okay, I think we're all set.
Okay.
Okay.
Hear you.
Was good, productive
Good,
meeting.
thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
All right. Thanks for providing entertainment for a good half of my ride home.
Take care, Adam.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.